You were? Oh, okay. So we're good. Okay. Well, it's all right. All right.
Read the information, though.
Absolutely. So we're continuing our public hearing on with James Urbano on 18 Hazel Terrace. Application for construction of 7 dwelling units at 18 Hazel Terrace. Welcome, Mr. Urbano.
Thank you.
I think we're good because, well, doesn't there have any questions? Because we, it went from Dr. Scroll back to the client came back. Okay. So, I mean, it's kind of what we thought was going to happen, but we kind of had to follow through. And I don't understand why, but they agreed that maybe the bond could be a little bit less.
They did?
I think so. Is that true?
They had to correct the amount, it's 82,000.
Oh, yeah, it is corrected.
Almost
It
83,000.
was just corrected. Sorry about that. That was just a bait.
I have a comment regarding that.
I'm sure you do.
So just for the hearing record, I just will note that we received revised plans.
Revised plans, and we have a letter from,
So the revisions are to 3/15/18 on behalf of the project engineer, and 3/14/18 on behalf of the project architect. And then we have a narrative dated February 28th, 2018, revised to March 29th, 2018. And then lastly, we have the comments from Bob Criscolo.
so it's not a problem. I'm not trying to cause problems, don't worry. I'm just asking a question, Chris. So it's okay, although that we're in the middle of a public hearing, that we have revised drawings?
Yeah, because they were here well in advance of this meeting, so the public had an opportunity to see them.
Okay.
And
Aren't the drawings in response to the recommendations?
and then you have, yeah. And then you were also submitted information on the lighting. You have the revised bond estimate. You have a letter dated March 15th, Nowakowski, Obima, Chow, and Kane. And Criscolo's memorandum dated March 21st, 2018. And then I passed out this evening, which I also emailed to you, another letter of support dated 3/27/18 from Elizabeth Antonucci of 7 Hazel Terrace.
All right. Any questions?
What changed between these revised plans and the previous two we reviewed?
If you look at by the way, the architectural plans,
Yep.
they're not in numerical order because I want to have the pages organized to show the elevations first and then through the floor plans. But if you look at the elevation, the tower before violated the height requirement,
Okay.
so that's been eliminated. I really.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I understand. Sure.
So I'm not happy with the appearance of the building. To me, it looks like the center bay looks like a floppy-eared dog with his head down. So the architect did a detailed sketch of a more traditional.
This one right here
Yes.
is
Yeah.
what?
That's that is it. That's the latest.
So they dropped the tower.
The
What's
tower's
this?
gone, completely
What's this?
eliminated. That is just a detailed treatment for the top of what's now the center bay.
This.
So, yeah. So
We're
instead,
getting in the line.
Yeah, because this has this.
The top is a classical pediment.
Yeah. So,
So it's
not
just,
that we get to tell you what to do, but stick to this one.
okay. Well, this is a very crude sketch, but shows you an alternative. But you like the original.
Yeah, this is,
You architects think alike.
I'm surprised he gave that to me. But anyway,
All right.
so stick to this one.
Okay, good enough.
Not that I'm going to tell you what to do.
No, I appreciate advice.
And my insurance doesn't cover me for that.
Yeah. So on the second page of elevations, you see the side elevation. It's page 7, but it's in numerical order, it's the second page.
And the wall along the paper road means you don't have to go onto the paper Bank Street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I have comments on that also. Should I address that now?
Good. Does everybody know what we're talking about?
As a result of the last meeting, when you said you had heard the abandonment in 2011
We had heard it, but then...
and denied it,
Right.
you denied it. And you see the minute, I got the minutes of the meeting, and the issue was, there was concern that the abandonment would cause a lot to be landlocked.
That's right.
So the owner of 3 lots along Crum Elbow is Chris O'Connor, and his intention is to join the lots into one and build 2 houses, eventually if he can get approval. That aside, he's consented to the abandonment. His lot would not be landlocked. The 3 lots are contiguous. So,
Okay, but we can't really address that tonight.
no, I'm not asking you, but this is relative to the retaining wall.
Got it.
I think the retaining wall would be a colossal waste of money. My expectation is the town, after it understands that the 3 abutters consent to the abandonment, would follow through with an abandonment. So
Because
I would
we're gonna
wait
have
for
to go
them.
back to the Board of Selectmen. And they're
Exactly.
And they're going to send it back to us.
Yes, yep. Bob Blythe, well, we started, the consenting letters were done last year. I'm not going to go through all of the details.
Yeah.
But as a result of the last meeting, Bob Blythe, who's my real estate attorney, put together another request addressed to TP&Z and the Board of Selectmen to review or consider the abandonment. There are 3 new consenting letters, so I'm going to put those into the record and give them to Chris or Terry. Bob Blythe's request.
But Jim, so to be clear, your present proposal in front of this commission,
Does not involve any abandonment. I was just, that was an
It
aside.
means you're building the wall.
I'm building a wall, yes.
Yeah, I understand. And, well, you have an attorney, so I probably shouldn't play attorney, but it seems to me that if there's 3 lots, and one of them is landlocked, and he's saying he's gonna,
No, one is not landlocked.
well, I guess evidently one is.
Well, you'll
Well, we
see.
must have had a reason. So, but you're...
No, there was a
you're saying that
question.
There were 3 lots.
Yeah, if you review your minutes, there was a question, would it be landlocked? Since there was a question, you couldn't decide, understandably. So, you made the proper decision based on the information you had at the time.
Yes. Okay, you can stay.
All right.
All right. So you were going through...
I'll make this quick, because I see there's no need to drag it out. But the zoning, the village district zoning overlay asks to make an attempt to coordinate with and complement surrounding historical, architectural, and design elements. And so, in Woodbridge, we have this is another aside, editorial comment. In Woodbridge, we have towers. So on the one hand, you're asking to try to complement existing historic details. On the other hand, the zoning ordinance doesn't permit it in terms of height. So that's just an aside.
That is true. But can you cite any historic buildings that have towers?
Yeah, the Center Church.
Okay, besides the church?
Well, that's one. 15 Research Drive is another.
Historic.
Historic?
Oh, historic. Well, it's in
I
the
mean, that
village.
was a quote, I got that quote from you, historic precedents.
Ah, interesting.
You just said it, but anyway, the church, okay. All right,
Again, that's just an aside.
I know.
The tower's gone. Chris Golo's comments from 21 were down to 2 observations, so we're all set there.
Yeah,
I'm going to hand, who do I give it to?
Me.
Here it
always
is.
give it to Chris.
Okay. I'm not sure of the hierarchy. And then a quick comment from, I got a note from Elizabeth Antonucci.
Yes.
And it's interesting. For over 40 years, myself and parents have watched this street, meaning Hazel Terrace, go downhill. I appreciate you wanting to build a building that will bring beauty back. She has confidence in me, I'm not sure. Bring beauty back to our street, and as I said before, we, the residents, support you, and it will be nice to have more neighbors rather than another business building. So here we have in Hazel Terrace sort of the opposite of what happened on the other side of Amity Road. The
You
residents
think?
want
You think?
more residents, yeah, and less businesses.
Maybe they can get together or something.
Here, little Chris.
So that was her way of saying, thank you, planning and zoning, for changing the zoning code in my neighborhood.
And any questions?
It works now. It works now. And are there any-
No questions. I don't have any.
Okay,
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
you're good.
Well, I have a question,
Yes.
sorry.
Yep.
It's about, and I think I've just forgotten, but the dwelling units you're gonna build will have either 1 or 2 bedrooms, and when is that to be decided?
Well, could I have the flexibility of allowing the market to decide?
Is that a part
There
of
may
the
be-
proposal, Chris?
I'm sorry?
One or the other?
Does it have to be either or? Then I'll pick.
No, I just want to, I just want to know for clarification if we're supposed to vote on this tonight from,
Do you need to vote on the unit size? On the number of bedrooms per unit or the number of units?
that's what
The
I'm not
question
sure.
that you need to look at is in terms of parking, I believe, because when this section was adopted, it didn't have any criteria. And so, looking at
For
the
size of
use
units.
tables that are in there,
Which is a-
we have to go back to where residences are allowed in other places.
Right, and he
that's-
permitted enough parking for.
And that specified you had to have 2 spaces for each dwelling unit. So when he was talking at last month's hearing about potentially having a certain number of 1-bedroom and then a certain number of 2-bedroom, where he was gonna have a total of 8, that actually wouldn't work with the parking that's underneath, which is 14.
Right,
Right.
14 spaces.
So he's constrained by having 14 spaces. That being said, if he chooses to make some 1-bedroom and some 2-bedroom, he can't exceed 7. So that's the short answer to your question.
And I believe that your regulations as focused as in this little magic little time period don't have a parking requirement.
No,
But in abundance of caution,
our regulations do have a parking thing. Maybe it doesn't refer to exactly our discussion, but that's not actually the way the regulations are supposed to work.
so my
This is
suggestion
our
is in
regulations,
abundance
we're
of
adding
caution,
things
we
on.
go back to what the parking requirement is.
No, but I want to make a clarification. Just because we didn't at that meeting talk about parking doesn't mean we don't have. We do have a parking. It's part of our zoning. He still has to meet all the zoning regs. So I don't want it to be misled on TV that we didn't cover the parking issue. We don't have to cover a specific parking issue unless we specifically changed it. Otherwise, it is always in the regs.
Staff recommendation to you is that you use abundance of caution, use the parking ratio that's established for residences.
There you go.
So I like to build to order. So one person might want a different configuration. I would like the flexibility to meet a customer or client's demand. But if there is no flexibility, then I have a floor plan included of 7 units, 4 2-bedroom, 3 1-bedroom. My original plan that you saw, so that's a total of 7 units, 14 parking spaces. My
Right.
original plan showed 7 2-bedroom units. So,
It sounds like it doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 2 bedrooms, it's the number of units.
No,
that
if he
goes.
builds all 2-bedroom units, he doesn't have enough room to put.
I do have enough parking.
room to do 28 spaces.
Is it the number
No,
of
no,
units or the
doesn't
number?
need it.
It's the number of units.
It's 2 spaces per dwelling unit. There's 7 dwelling units, whether those units have 1 or 2 bedrooms, it makes no difference.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Okay.
not the number of bedrooms, it's the
Right,
number
right,
of
right.
units. That's
Correct.
what I was
Right.
wanting to clarify.
Okay.
So if the market demand was for a 3 or 4-bedroom unit, could you build that?
No, I couldn't. The zoning approval was for 2-bedroom units.
7, so that, okay, I got it.
8 units. Yeah, it's number of units.
Units times 7.
And what I wanted to say earlier about the bond,
Next.
that with every project, there's a construction budget. So you saw the details in the narrative. I was asked to include photos of details. So the details, good details, add cost. So what I take out of the construction budget to park $86,000 on the side, that's doing nothing, which might be applied to constructing, adding quality to a building, kind of defeats the purpose of building as much into a project as one can build. So there's a tension between soft costs on the one hand and hard dollars that need to go into a project to make it as good as it can be. So consider that when you establish the bond. This would be my 5th commercial building in town, if you call it commercial. And I've been building in town for a long time. And there's never been an issue. The bond at 245 Amity Road, I believe, was half this amount, and it's 4 or 5 times the building in terms of square footage. So I'm not sure why this bond is as high as it is, but it seems unreasonable to me.
Isn't this a recommendation from Bob Criswell?
Yeah, it is.
So I wonder if I do believe that many people believe that the site conditions produce more risk. And so I wonder if you would be amenable, and perhaps the commission might consider it as well, that we hold to the recommended bond, and we plan on releasing half of it when the foundation is complete. Because that, a lot of the site risks evaporate after that foundation is intact.
It's reasonable.
You'd have to get the
I don't know about half, but
a portion.
but when you're saying the site work, you mean including the retaining wall
Correct.
and all that.
And we've already, regarding the retaining wall, I'm not talking about the wall along Bank Street, but in the back, I pointed out to the engineer, if we can raise the foundation wall, which we can, X number of feet, then there's less wall or maybe no wall required. So that's
No,
something that
I
will
said
be
that
worked out
last
over
time.
time.
That's
Thanks, Jim. Maybe I was
Just give David that.
You want to be someone else?
Yeah.
Well, if you were to consider that sort of thing, a bond established by this commission has to be released by this commission. So that would be a consideration for you, I suspect, in that.
Well, I would consider a percentage, but I don't, 50%.
Whatever.
Since our consultant engineer is recommending X, he would recommend less than that, so. I could see maybe 20%. I don't know what you feel about that.
Time. It seems to me that your representative prepared a bond estimate that would be $81,673, which is pretty close to what our consultant determined.
Oh, I saw 86,000, I thought.
It was 82 something.
82.
82.
Okay.
Well, that's good.
closest to the site.
Is yours, oh, okay, yep.
81673.
I'm in favor. If you can show evidence of sale of the units, also, that could be helpful. So if the units are, the site work is done and then the units are selling, that's reason to also perhaps reduce the amount a little bit to show that there's interest in the market. So I would be willing to reduce the benefits with that information as well. But I'd rather not say now. Do we have to say now?
No.
But I think,
Yes.
did you hear that, Jim?
Yeah, you could work that out, it's fine.
So I'd like to do what the engineering firm for the town suggested. But I would certainly listen to, if you came back, that's the proper procedure, okay? When the site work is done, take a look at that and see how the units are doing. Are the units starting to sell? How's the market interest in it? You can do pre-sales, right? In the unit, so you can start to sell them when you do the work? Or
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially we might to be able to do early release. I might be in favor of that a little bit. We'd like to listen to what you have to say.
Okay.
So that means you'd be opposed to 20% after the foundation of the site work is done?
No, not necessarily. A 20% reduction after the, no.
20% release.
You cool with that?
All right with that.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
So Chris, I'm not sure this goes to you or to Jim. So on this property, there's no age restriction, correct?
Correct.
And what's the maximum amount of occupants that are allowed per dwelling unit? Is it based in the bedroom or is it unlimited?
There is no occupancy. There's only numbers of bedrooms.
Right.
If you choose to put 20 people in a room, go for it. Conversely, if you want to have something with lots of room and only have one person, you could do that too. So we don't regulate occupancy except when it's a condition where they're not a family. We look at a dwelling unit as a family. So when they're non-related, then we look at no more than a cap of 4 non-related individuals. So other than that, it's a family unit.
And that's a regulation that's town-wide.
Ideally, I'd like to be able to address all ages, and that might even mean an elderly person who's able-bodied and needs or would want an efficiency. But I'm sort of limited in that I could not accommodate that, correct?
Well, it's
Because
one
of the
of
parking
units.
requirement you're talking about?
No, because the building has to be, the footprint has to be whatever it is to get the 14 spaces. But an efficiency is half the size of a one-bedroom. So building an efficiency, unless I'm building more than 1 or 2, to fill the space, wouldn't be cost-effective. So if there was a formula ideally to allow the mix that the market wants, that would be.
I think you would have had.
But
to
there is
come-
no such
Yeah, I think
formula.
you would have had to come in with your application and ask for that.
Ask for the flexibility. I think I did ask.
Well, no, you asked for the flexibility, but I think you have to come in, this is my plan, and in my plan, I have 2 efficiencies, and I would like to ask for reprieve on 3 parking spaces.
So, meaning in the future, if that manifested. Okay. All right. Makes sense.
But now, it's like, we don't really know what's happening. It's kind
Understood.
of in flux, so it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
I mean, your application specifically said construct 7 dwelling units.
Right.
7,
The
2, yeah.
7. The regulations say that you can construct up to a 1,250 square foot
Yeah.
unit.
Yeah.
So you're constrained by the size of the unit and the regs, and you're constrained by your application, which
Yeah.
is 7.
So if I built 7 efficiencies, there'd be half the building left empty. But I understand. That's what I asked for. That's what I'm getting, and I'm fine with that. So can't cover all the bases.
Not all the time. Is there, okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any comments from the audience in favor of the application? Is there anybody here that would like to speak opposed to the application? Perfect. All right. Very good. Thanks, Jim. We have a application for a special permit from the New England Brewery, and we have to schedule a public hearing for outdoor dining area. But I'd like to be able to do that next month.
Maybe they could bring samples.
If they wanted to pass easily, they should send us samples ahead of time. Or maybe we should move our meeting to the last Friday of the month. All right. Okay, let's move into our work session. The first item on the agenda is 18 Hazel Terrace. Any discussion? Is there a motion to about 18 Hazel Terrace to approve it, or
I motion to approve.
second? Second. And the motion will include the bond reduction of 20% after the full foundation and retaining walls are installed. I'm wondering if they should be inspected by Bob Criscola. Yeah, I think so too.
In the motion, I would include the amount of the bond,
Yeah,
which is
because our-
82,673.
Yeah, because ours, Bob says 82,673, but this, what
It's 81.
he submitted is off by 1,000. I don't know if it's an addition error. but-
81,673, right, and
Yeah.
an even thousand.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's an error in the addition, but.
This adds up correctly. I don't know about this one. All right.
You want to make it 81,673?
No, I want to do what Bob Criscola.
82,673.
My motion included that.
I knew that. I heard that. All right.
I'll get that.
All those in favor say aye.
Chris, who's voting tonight?
Paul is not because he
Everybody
wasn't.
except Paul.
So
the
both
five
Jeff
of
and
you.
I are voting?
Yes.
All in favor? So we say.
Opposed? Great. There you go. Good luck. Looking forward to it. So, report of activity in this crowd?
Yeah,
All right. How was the rubber chicken?
that was 2 meetings ago.
Oh, maybe you didn't report last one.
I think I might have reported about that.
Okay.
The most recent meeting that I attended, which was March 8th, there were 3 action items. There were proposed zoning regulation amendments from the city of West Haven regarding adult-oriented establishments. There were proposed zoning regulation amendments from the town of Prospect regarding agricultural uses and keeping of small farm animals and fowl. And proposed zoning amendment from the town of North Haven to establish independent living facilities as a use in the IL 80 districts. All of which were discussed, none of which had an intermunicipal impact, and all of which received a favorable review.
So since our meeting about those units for additional units to put on your property, I've like seen all these articles, but all these like prefab units that kind of like pop in, and those actually technically could be quickly done.
They could, I think it's still somewhat complicated
Yeah.
in terms of leaching field and septic hookup and things
Right.
like
Yeah,
that.
no. So it's interesting. It's usually I think it's the construction part. All right. So we're going to have a discussion. Leslie's going to join us. Run. Update of the zoning regulations from our POCD meeting. Not POCD, I'm sorry.
Open meeting.
Open meeting.
Yeah, forgot to bring those.
So, just as a little background, on the discussions with Leslie and also input from Miriam Dubuque, our zoning commission attorney, the suggestion was to try to, our regs are in serious have serious problems. They're outdated, and the idea was to try to pick out the items that have the least impact but are going to help the regulations in the short term. And then, as we move forward, then address the other more contentious issues. But I think that I'll let Leslie run the show, but we found a number of ways to pull things out that weren't crucial in order to do what we were proposing. So I think everybody will be pleasantly surprised, I hope, maybe.
Would that be changing regulations town-wide or only in the districts that were the subject matter?
Well, only in the district that we've been focused on.
I would think that it would be better received, just prospectively thinking, if the purpose of these changes is to update and modernize and improve, that we should do so town-wide rather than singling out the subject districts.
Well, that is technically phase 2, but the charge and the engaging of the planner was a very specific scope, which is what we've kind of stuck to. And the idea was not that we would stop there. That line was drawn because there are things that we thought, from a planning perspective and from surveys and from economic development, that the things that we're trying to do were in sync with what those beliefs were. Clearly, they weren't all welcomed with open arms. So that's why. But the idea is to. We'd have to do another host scope, and I'd have to go back to the Board of Selectmen to get more funding to engage a planner services for A and B.
Okay.
And we did that, by the way, because we thought it was easier, but we could be wrong about that now. In retrospect, armchair quarterbacking.
So what Leslie's going to propose or discuss was your opinion, your proposal based on your own work, or input from that meeting and the members up here?
Input from the meeting and
Yeah.
my meeting with Leslie, and input from Marianne Dubuque. But nothing's etched in stone. The idea was
I get
to
it.
meet and think about what could come out, what should stay in, and then come back. The commission's making the decisions. It's nothing to do with our meeting. Our meeting was just to help us in this meeting.
So as part of this discussion, are we going to, or did you guys, my dad passed away, so I missed the last meeting. Did you go over the notes from the special meeting in February? Was that discussed?
Everybody on the commission has gotten them, and then we just got our minutes from that, which actually I think we're possibly voting on tonight.
And so as part of that, I was confused. We didn't have a discussion after that meeting. There was one map that was presented, but clearly it wasn't. We didn't go over this in procedures, or how can I ask my question and get clarification?
You can ask any question.
Okay, so I was certainly taken aback when I understood that there was one map circulated in one place and one map that came to the commission and one map was on the board.
Yeah, okay, so that's not true. There was only one map up there, and the map that was small, 8.5 by 11, was the same map that was up on the board. So I know that's what people were saying up there, but that isn't true. It was the same map. In fact, it was a reduction of this map to make this map.
So how did that genie get out of the bottle that there were multiple maps in circulation?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of genies that got out of the bottle, so I can't really answer that question, but there's only one map.
So nothing's changed over the weeks or months regarding the map that we're talking about.
Well, we can't really respond to people saying things like we handed out 3 different maps when we only had one. There's only one map. And it was a big one, and it was reduced, all in the same place. Printed, reduced. That's what was handed out.
That was the same map that we had seen earlier.
And it's the same map we have.
Okay.
Okay? So, as I pointed out, the only error I will tell you was on both maps, because they're both the same, is that the line for C was actually drawn in an incorrect spot. It was actually across, residential C goes across 69. It was drawn on
The other side of 69.
the wrong side of 69.
Okay.
But other than that,
Both
it's
same.
our map.
Okay.
And the small one and the big one are exactly the same. So I can't really tell you where this, there's a bunch of stuff that was out there wasn't really correct. So, but anyway, it was the same map.
Got it.
Can I go back to the historical perspective you gave previously?
Yes.
Didn't we also focus on this area because that was also the focus of the Economic Development Commission? And they sort of dovetailed, given the work on the POCD as well? I mean, weren't those all influences?
No. Well, they did their own exercise, but actually before our POCD.
Right, oh no, I know that. But then when it came time to hire a planner and to work on our regs, I thought all of those factors played a role in focusing on where we're focusing.
Yes. Everything, the whole area was included. That's correct.
Okay.
And yes, it is true. The POCD focused down there. The Plattis report focused down there. That has different borders as far as parameters, what Plattis did and what we did. And so
I have one more question. When you talk about surveys, do you mean land surveys or surveys from residents of either the village or the whole town?
I didn't follow that.
You said that the proposal is based in part on surveys. I don't know if did you mean land surveys or do you mean surveys that residents took?
No, that map that we had.
Got it. Okay. Land survey. Got it. Okay.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of run through my understanding, at least, trying to keep this all straight, based upon the public input session from last month, or I guess now it's April, so 2 months ago, and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're considering and what you're looking to change and what you're not looking to change. So right now, looking at we had been looking at the T3 zone and we had been looking to use the regulations to help preserve the existing areas. That seems to have conjured a bit of an uproar, so the chairman announced at that meeting in February that we were leaving the C and D zones the way that they are, not changing those. The same with Deb 1. My one caution on Deb 1 is that because your existing zoning regulations don't break down retail by sort of small, medium, and large, for lack of better terminology, that when you are looking at those, you may want to think about doing that in the future, so that you don't end up with potentially, there seem to be a huge gasp in the room when it was mentioned that the possibility of a big box store could go in the Dev 1, which it could now. So you want to keep that in mind.
But we also talked about putting in the regulations for Dev 1, any development that goes in there would have X percentage of, if it was a mixed-use project, it would be X percentage of residential to X percentage of retail on
Right.
the ground floor.
Right.
So I think that'll actually help a lot in that area. Because we don't really want to create a whole big housing mass down there, and by saying that a certain percentage of it's going to have to be retail on the first floor, we take spots that somebody might say, I want to put residential in. Does that make sense?
You're talking about on a multi-story building, someone would put residential on both stories in Dev 1?
Well, technically, residential can go from the ground floor all the way up 3 floors. And so by saying...
By not saying you have to have a certain amount.
We're saying we're throwing it out for discussion. Really clear about this. Mixed use is really where we should be going. I know that everybody thinks that Woodbridge can stay frozen, but it's not going to stay frozen, no matter what anybody says. And if we had been proactive with our zoning regs years past, we wouldn't be worried about whether affordable housing was going to come in on this large lot. So if we had been spreading things around, which is what you're supposed to be doing, then you don't have to worry about somebody building one affordable project in one spot, because that immediately develops into a spot that nobody wants to necessarily. It's not positive. So that's why you have zoning regulations that are a little more proactive. Things are changing, no matter what anybody says, and everybody is looking for someplace to walk around. Everybody's looking for someplace to shop, and you do that by putting in mixed use, and you have people living where there's stores where they can go downstairs and get mail, or they can get groceries and things like that. So that's the idea behind what we're doing. The boundaries and how big that is, I agree, is something that's what we're here for discussion on. But the idea is very logical, and it's a good thing to do. I'll go back to my first statement. Woodbridge is not freezing. It's not going to work. So, sorry.
What he said. So we're looking at the possibility of having a requirement of a certain percentage in the Dev 1 district, of a certain percentage being allowed for residential, and the certain percentage being required for retail or commercial, both, some kind of combination, so that you don't have just a single use, and those uses, those non-residential uses, are things that help incorporate the general public into an area that might otherwise only be, if it was solely residential, it gets very self-contained.
So if we change the reg in Dev 1 and we say we're going to do this percentage of residential to retail, blah blah blah, won't that help us if somebody decides to come in with a big box store?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is one of the reasons you do stuff like this. That's the reason we want to curb this. We don't really want a big box store.
So they couldn't put in a big box store without putting in a certain amount of residential units, you're saying? In the same project, Jeff, or nearby, or how would that work?
The idea is if they're coming in with a project,
Yeah.
there has to be a percentage of residential to retail. So, I mean, we're setting parameters, but I think that it would be more evident. Again, it's up for discussion.
Just discussion, I understand.
And anybody can disagree. it would be the logical thing that this would be advantageous for Woodridge to, if there's gonna be development there eventually anyway, so we just have to, it would be better if we had some control over it. And because if somebody comes in and says they wanna put if we don't change anything, and somebody says they wanna come in and put a target there, we don't actually get to say, well, in our regulations and our POCD, we said we wanted to do X. They get to say, no, you don't get to say that. We can put a target there if we want.
But
We could object them.
but wouldn't there be a hearing about the traffic first? I mean, wouldn't that be one of the ways?
Well, they have to go
constrain-
through approval, they have
Right.
to do traffic,
Okay.
but it's, you've noticed, these things still get through.
Just trying to picture someone coming to put a target in.
We got a huge 55 and older project approved in there. So, that wasn't little either.
Okay,
Try
so
not to
that's,
interrupt you anymore.
this is a conversation. Okay, so that was one of the things. We've talked and got some response back from the public as well about, we've talked about keeping the C and D zones the way that they are, but maybe formulating them as form-based, using the format of form-based codes, but keeping them the way that they are, so that there aren't any changes, for instance, in setbacks, and not combining those into a single zone, which would be in a lot of ways a lot easier to manage, but there seemed to be an issue with that, so it's looking at keeping the BB zone as well. So basically keeping the zones that are strictly residential now, keeping them the way that they are.
Can you explain what you meant by form-based? I'm
Sure.
supposed to know what that means, so I don't recognize.
So the diagrams that were in the draft that you all got a few months ago that we went through, that had the things that looked like nothing you had seen before in your zoning regulations, that were diagrams of setbacks, diagrams of heights, building heights, things like that. We can put the same information into that format so that every zone, you don't have to learn how to read two different types of zones, but the information is the same as it is now.
So does that mean that if a structure were torn down or demolished, right, that we're saying we're not going to make any changes to, anything new that's built would then have to adhere to whatever is written in the new regs?
Yes, but what's written in the new regs for those strictly residential zones would be the same as what's there now.
Reflects what's already there, but better explained. Is that what that, basically what that means?
Yes,
I'm just being dense, sorry.
you're not.
Okay. So that people aren't going to be able to say that we're changing things. All we're doing
Yes.
is clarifying it.
Exactly.
You're not.
There we go.
So C is saying is the same, D is saying the same, BB is saying the same. When we talk about the map, we may get into another discussion, but right now the idea is, and I think they're going to be, we talked about calling them what, T3C, T3D, and T3BB.
What's the team?
Transect. It's like T4, but it's.
Okay.
What was the resistance to combining C and D?
So there's different density allowances in C and D. So
They each have their own independent.
yeah,
Metric.
and so I mean, so I don't want to dwell on it, but I'm happy to talk as much as.
That's all you need to say. Is different density.
No, I really want to explain.
Okay, then you can explain that.
So right now in C, you're allowed 8.7 dwelling units per acre. In D, you're allowed 10.9 dwelling units per acre, which, by the way, I don't think anybody in C realized that. And in BB, it's smaller. So we were actually, by calling it T3, Remember, C is 8.7. We were actually making the density smaller and calling it 8 per dwelling units per acre instead of 8.7 and 10.9. So the density was going to go down in D and down a little bit in C. So I think it's just easier to respond and say, we're leaving it the same.
Yeah, I'm not sure that a lot of the folks that have gone to that, that went to that meeting, or that have gotten in touch with me, okay, actually put too much work into understanding some of the granularity that goes involved in these things. I think that a lot of the resistance was, please don't change anything because we don't want to make it look like the pictures on the screen.
Well,
You know,
so the pictures on the screen
that's where the
had nothing
resistance.
to do with their zones.
I understand, but I'm saying I'm not sure people were thinking that through. And so I think some of the resistance that you might be hearing or seeing in the press was a little bit that please don't change anything.
Yeah.
Was a little bit where it was coming from, and maybe people weren't thinking about some of these other things.
So now we're suggesting not.
Just as a historical perspective, what happened was in 1898, and this is where it all goes back to, where you currently has residential C, there was a subdivision before zoning ever happened, and they created lots that were 25 feet wide by 100 feet deep. And when zoning started in 1932, they had these things that were already divided into these small pieces, and they said, well, we really can't, I guess they said, we can't really put a house on that. So what they said is, okay, you need a minimum of 5,000 square feet in that particular area. And so that's where you came up when you look at your zoning that currently is in place with 5,000 and a dimension of 50 by 100. Over in what's currently residential D, same thing happened in 1898, seemed to have been a good year, only they made smaller lots, and they were 20 feet wide by 100 feet deep. So again, when zoning started in 1932, they said, we've already got these things that are broken apart, we have to do something with it. And so they said, we need a minimum of 2. So they created the 40 by 100 or 4,000 square feet in area. So there's a historical reason that goes where those things came from to begin with. And the same thing happened up in Bradley Highlands, which you're not even dealing with right now, which is residential B. That was done prior to zoning too.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. I think a lot of people saw the pictures and made an assumption without, because I don't think we went over that specific reg at the meeting.
Which one, C and D?
Yeah.
Well, because I was getting some extra pressure, I was saying that our suggestion probably would be that we wouldn't change
Got it.
C and D and BB, but that kind of went by the wayside quickly, which goes back to my original thought was not to change it at the
Right.
beginning.
And the other piece is that, I mean, our role there was to listen and not
Right.
to respond.
Right.
Exactly.
And if you can't respond, you can't refute. And
Right.
had we refuted, it just would have gotten people angry. So it was just
Right.
as well just to
Yeah.
listen.
Although I get worse for simplicity's sake, making them both the same size would be preferred, but it's not, I get why it's not worth the can of worms. Because the education part to the people living there would be the biggest challenge.
And it's not that important.
Right, agreed.
It really doesn't. It doesn't.
Doesn't impact a whole
It
lot.
doesn't really help our original focus scope. So.
And then, and then once again, all of the other things that we talked about, the ancillary things like restrictions on the number of foot candles, the lighting levels, both maximums and minimums. Those are the those kinds of things that we've talked about. Types of trees that you can use for street trees, so that there's a list of trees that actually won't heave your sidewalk. All of those things would then come in, and they can, depending upon how you write it, can also potentially affect. It wouldn't have to just be the T4 zone that it would affect. It can affect the entire area, depending upon how you choose to write it.
Okay, so
That's just text.
just so we can move on to the next thing. So C, D, and BB don't get touched. We have to talk about whether we want Dev 1 to have a percentage of residential to retail on the idea that we can kind of have a little more control over what goes in there. And just a second going back to, you can't see someone putting a target in there and they still have to go before. If you don't want a target in there, the more things that they get turned down for, the better.
Yeah.
So it's, if you just rely on one thing, chances are somebody will be able to make it work. So,
Things come to us over the years where we couldn't believe there was no way to deny it,
right,
the way our regulations were
right.
written, but we couldn't. So
Right.
we had to approve them, despite the fact that we sometimes had a room full of people who were saying, how can you approve this?
Right.
It was because we have to act according to the regs and not how we might think what would be best for the town and ourselves personally, or even as a commission.
So let's start at the beginning. I mean, it'll be pretty quick, actually. The administration part, you can. There, I know when I was asking questions, you were pointing out that those things are actually already part of our regs. So let's start moving
Okay.
from 1.0 administration through definitions and blah blah blah.
Okay, your administration section, section 1, is all from what you have now. There are no changes proposed. It's just some things have been moved around a little bit so that all of your administration stuff is in one place. Okay, but it's what you have, and it's, Marion has reviewed it. It's all legal and all of that. If we go to the definition section,
Well, actually, let's back up a second, because
Yep.
in administration we talk about T1, T2, T3, T4. So the only thing we're going to change is the T3. We're going to have sub things T3, B, T, B, B, C, and D. That's going to be
Yes.
listed in here also.
yes.
Okay.
So your definitions, a lot of definitions have been added. That's what happens when, there's just a lot of time that goes by between when you update your regulations. They are based upon, and they've all been cross-referenced, they're based upon what are, you want definitions of words that are actually used in your regulations, and words that are not used, you don't want in there. So all of that cross-referencing has, at this point, taken place. So there are words and terms that have been taken out, terms that have been added, things like Airbnb type things that are also known as online hospitality services, things that are, I know we went through this at one of our meetings. They are, they're definitions of awning, but this has all been cross-referenced, and including things like, bicycle stalls, single bicycle stalls, all the things that are in the zoning regulations that people may find that they want clarified when they're looking for something. So that's all been included in the definitions.
And
Anything
the reason
specific?
we do this is so that when someone shows up and wants to put in a store that we don't even mention in our regulations, we've hopefully addressed it, as opposed to before we were pretty good at getting caught shooting it from the hip.
Section 3 for land uses. There are things that, again, don't exist anymore, things that, and I went over this with staff many times,
We spent a lot of time.
and we
going
all
through
went
that.
over this. Yeah, we all went over this as well. And this, again, is where we started to look at regulating some things by size. So that if you had a small retail area versus a large retail area, are you going to allow something the size of a drugstore, pharmacy, CVS or Walgreens or something like that, versus something the size of a Target? Very different sizes. Where are you going to allow which, and are you going to allow all of them? So that's, again, the kind of thing that's in here. We did go over that pretty exhaustively, both all of you as a commission, and I went over it with the staff a few times. They were very helpful on that. So that is in terms of the uses, and then the,
And then again, on the zoning districts, we're gonna spread out, there's,
right.
okay.
So that chart that's in there is going to be redone. It's going to take out the T1, 2, and 3 and substitute it with the T3C, T3D, etc.
Right.
And there's also the explanations that go with all of that afterwards. Again, none of that has really changed since this commission looked at it the last time.
Oh, and we have to remember to, because this was a typo in 3.3.QQ. We call it 200,000, and we were putting, I think, 100 gross leasable.
3.3.QQ.
The last page, the square footage for large store was larger than we wanted.
I don't have the regs in front of me, but I think when you had the hearing, there was another location where it was 250, and that was one of the things that was brought up. There was that section that said 200,000, and then I think there's a table where it references to 250. So just saying,
Yeah, I
have
think
the-
I changed that actually.
I only have it marked at the one that says 200, but we don't really want that size.
okay,
So,
well, I'm just
I
mentioning.
think it was 250,000.
There was in the
Yeah,
table.
yeah.
well, not in this one. Well, I hear you.
I don't have that in front of me, but that's the plans where she's speaking of the revising, right? Is that the one with the 5-story?
Oh, yeah, that was a.
That was
supposed to be
that
three.
was
That was
also
supposed
we
to
had
be
been
three.
right.
We had actually
It
changed
is
that to
3. Yeah, I did
Oh.
change. I definitely changed that to 3. And just so you all know, that's what you have now. You have 3-story buildings in Woodbridge now. So
Right.
it falls under the
Although I think
category
I
of
think
not changing.
What size is the lender building? I feel like the lender building is 5 stories.
3.
Oh, it is 3? There you go.
Tall ceiling.
So
Okay, yep.
These low ceilings, isn't it?
Tall ceiling.
I don't know, I was in there. Okay,
so again, falls
What's the height
into the
of the
category
house?
of it's not changing.
Understood.
that's what counts.
Okay. In section 4, and again, that's the one with the bulk dimensions. That's changed from the where it says 5, it's changed to 3. Again, these will all be changed so that the T1, T2, all of that is going to get changed. And so that will reflect what's existing. Some of this is just, it's the logistics of the document, because we're not changing, because we're not combining as we thought we would. It's sort of teasing this stuff back apart again. So that's just, that's the typing work for me.
So do you have that circled because we don't have anything in the regs for that, or because we're not addressing it?
It has to be filled in, but it's existing.
It's existing, okay. I
So
just wanna make sure.
it just has to be filled in for what we have all in the code for A and B.
But for instance, things like the parking calculations, those are based upon, current best practice numbers. So the idea is to leave those so you don't end up with lots and lots of asphalt where you really don't need it. And just wondering if there's any. And here again, the term street screen and bicycle stall is used a lot in this section, and those are in the definitions so that people who are not generally familiar with those things can look them up. Everything else that we discussed is in here pretty much the same. Your signage regulations are just reformatted, but they're what you have, what you approved a couple of years ago. Just going through here quickly to see. Yeah, I think that's it. Did you have anything else there, Jeff?
No.
Section 5, basic standards. That section is meant to give clarity to what different uses are. So things like hours of operation, change in use, there's a huge section on environmental conditions. There's we've added preservation of stone walls, which is a big part of working toward maintaining the rural character of Woodbridge, which was a big thrust of your POCD. There's, again, these are all things that we went over when we literally went through this section by section, word by word. The town engineer recrafted the sections on sedimentation and erosion control, stormwater management.
Here's the chart which says 250,000. 5.1.
Yeah, I think I changed that already.
I think you did already too.
I just want to mention one thing. The town is working or has a permit, a stormwater discharge permit with the state, and there are certain goals and objectives that the town is required to meet, and one of them is zoning regulations regarding LID stuff. So I can just make sure that Leslie has what that part is so that we incorporate. I mean, it's a step that we have a year or two to get it in place, but it's something that if you're going to be updating your regulations, this would be an opportune time to do it.
Great.
And I think we gave you the stuff from Yukon, from Clear on the LID stuff.
we did.
Yeah, I think that got incorporated by description as opposed to, by just
Okay.
adding the
So we just need to double check
citation
and
rather
make
than,
sure that
yeah.
that's in there.
Great, thank you. Again, all of the things that are, lot block and building configuration, all those things, nothing's changed since we last met on those. So it's all in here. There's...
Well, it's not only, it's also what people perceive as what's changed. So if there are things in here that, we approved it before too, but that didn't fly very far. So if there's anything that you think from the comments, although I don't think any of the comments were anything to do with this.
Yeah, this section was not
It's
really...
pretty good. We're telling people what kind of trees they can put in, the stuff you really want to do.
Yeah, in terms of, where you can put your, sheds and things like that so that it's easy to deal with. Again, this is not zones A and B, which have very different configurations. But so, allowing people to put their shed sort of toward the back of their property and in the corner so they can maximize the use of their property. What else have we got here? Some of this is just regulations on parking and how, making sure that if you're only required to have 10 parking spaces, for instance, if you as the property owner or developer think that you can't possibly rent or sell the property without putting in 15, those last 5 have to be pervious surface. They have to be more environmentally sensitive than what the maximum required is. So those kinds of environmentally protective regulations are in here. We talked about them. I haven't added anything since we went over them. Lighting we discussed. That's all. Yeah, it's your. I mean, there really isn't anything that's changed since we met last on these for this. If anybody has any questions, let me know. We added queuing standards that you didn't have before. So somebody wants to put a drive-through in. Not only do they have to come in for a special exception for the drive-through itself, but they have to make sure that they have the number of spaces for queuing for that drive-through, so they're not backing into traffic. So those are done by use. So it's different for a pharmacy than for a bank teller, for instance. That's section 5. And all of what I have done, now I have to go backwards a little bit, is I did start formatting the zoning regulations in the software program that handles it best, but now I've got to go back and redo a lot of those spreadsheets and charts. So it's going to take a little bit of time to shift those and make those, change those zones back and adapt all of that. But
So
that's,
the elephant in the room
yes,
is T4,
the elephant in the room is T4.
right?
T4, I mean, basically when the charge that I was given was to figure out how to maximize or at least dramatically increase the possibility for the tax base within Woodbridge, again, not including residential zones A and B, to be very mindful of the possibility of flooding and not do anything that was going to exacerbate that. And then also looking at really giving a sense of place to the downtown area. Those are kind of the 3 main charges.
So right now, because we don't have it on the map, because I was supposed to have Chris bring it up, but I forgot. But so right now in our GB,
I have one if you want.
GB1, well, I have this one. I have this one, but I was looking for more. I think you have this one. Yep, that's it.
Same thing.
Yeah. So, but so right now, is it GB1 with the text amendment?
Mm-hmm.
GB1.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is not going to be easy. I'm sorry. So GB1, which is basically a T4, which is what we did our text amendment on, is it kind of goes up through like this here. I think it goes across the street. Can anyone see that?
Yeah.
No. So this is our GB1 right now. That's the only thing, and that's basically what a T4 is. We allow residential and we encourage residential and retail.
So you're saying it's this area?
Yeah, so that was what our text amendment was about. And those are all as, where is it in here to show the size of those units?
600, you adopted 650 for apartments.
Right, where is it?
Is that what you're,
Yeah,
it should be in 5.
okay, well, anyway, I think it's 600 square feet too, I think you're right. And, and the idea is that 650 square feet doesn't, basically get you a studio or a one bedroom. So that way, the idea was that to curb the number of bedrooms, to have big families in it. We'll just leave it at that. I'm supposed to get too specific. The T4 on our map, as you can see, is actually a much larger area. And by the way, this is, I think I'm about right, but anyway, so this is technically, C goes all the way across the road here like this. So, as opposed to where we cut it, it's actually over there.
C goes across the road up to Bradley on
Yeah.
the east side and then goes down to Buddy DeGeniero's Realty. It stops at Buddy DeGeniero's Realty.
Right here, I got you.
Good
Okay.
job.
So again, the idea was to encourage development that has residential and retail, etc. The idea was to have it going up part of Amity Road, up to past Bradley Road, and also that's why actually it went into that. That's why that C section got cut off, because the idea was that you would go up 69, and on both sides of the street you could have residential, and the idea that you would have retail.
So is this C2? Chris just said it goes up to Bradley. This is Bradley. So C goes all the way up, is this arm here?
Bradley's down here.
No, this is Bradley.
Oh, here's
This is Bradley.
Right.
So all of this.
Bradley's
So,
in the.
so C goes
middle
just
of
up to
that.
Bradley, or it goes up?
It just goes
That's it.
up to Bradley. On the north side of Bradley, it turns into residential BB.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, right. That's what BB is.
Okay, so BB goes to
Right.
here and C goes up to.
So the idea was that on a busy road, and that would where you would want to put retail and residential, blah, blah, blah. But assuming we're leaving it there, let's see the way it is. So then, I think part of our discussion is where our meets and bounds are as far as this T4. Should it go up Amity Road? Should it not go up Amity Road? The reason it went up Amity Road is because in the Dev 1, there's already residential there. And so the idea was usually you try to have the same thing on each side of the street. But, so obviously the other elephant in the room is traffic. We have traffic reports for this area. They're not actually overly informative, because they just tell us that it's busy certain hours of the day, which we actually already know. And there are no minimal, if any, suggested solutions on how to fix it. Most people think that you're supposed to be widening streets and put in multiple lanes. That actually does not help the traffic issue. It comes with the territory, and it's a state road. These are state roads, so we're kind of have our hands tied on this. But maybe you could talk about the parking a little bit more than I can.
Well, I just want to just touch on traffic for a minute. Jeff's absolutely right. Actually, widening roadways gives you what's called induced demand, and it actually is it's counterintuitive, but if you widen roads, you end up with more traffic. The other thing is you have buildings that are fairly close to the street right there, so there would be a lot of takings by the state if they were decided they were going to widen those roadways.
Interesting.
So that's another thing to keep in mind. When I sketched out these boundaries, they were based more in terms of how properties are being used now. So which zone does it look like they belong in based upon how they're being used now? That's how that, combined with the fact that you want to have the same zone on each side of the street, is where those lines came from, as well as obviously what the existing zones are. The best way to, really the two best ways to decrease the amount of traffic are, one, to increase mass transportation, which is certainly beyond the scope of Woodbridge itself, and the other is to encourage walkable areas where people can live, but they don't have to necessarily drive to get to where they want to be, which has been a lot of the thinking behind a lot of our conversations about what to allow in the T4 zone. Those are really the two ways to decrease the amount of traffic, and again, one of them is kind of beyond your ability to take on. Woodbridge just isn't in a position, either as any municipality in Connecticut, to take on mass transportation unto themselves. So decreasing the amount of driving that people have to do, and that can be done in all kinds of ways that don't necessarily have anything to do with the zoning regulations. It can be, increasing bike lanes, putting bike paths in that don't even necessarily go where roads are. There are other solutions and ways to diminish the amount of driving that people need to do. But in terms of what zoning regulations can do, the best thing that zoning regulations in this case can do is to help you establish places where people don't have to drive, where they can live, park their car, and walk.
I'm not very familiar with the actual data, but my guess is that 90% of the traffic has nothing to do with people that live in that neighborhood or elsewhere in Woodbridge. So there's very little that we could possibly do to ameliorate the traffic problem there. It's fruitless almost.
Yeah, everybody that comes from all the way up comes down through Woodbridge. It is one of the busiest areas. They did at one point saw a traffic count of how many cars go past like where the Starbucks is. And it was like an instant gold mine because there were so many cars that went by there. One of the problems with previous businesses evidently is there's so many cars that nobody even wants to stop because they don't want to get out of the traffic. They just want to keep going to get to where they're going. But you're right.
Yes, and that is beyond your control.
So then the question is if we limit the size of the T4, which seemed to be a lot of problems. If we limit the size of T4, what are we putting in the rest of what we're calling out T4s? So that's so if we say we're just going to do a T4, the pictures that were being shown were ideally what we would possibly see down Lucy Street and things like that, maybe to that extent, but when we didn't have pictures it didn't do well, and when we had pictures it didn't do well. So but you still have to decide what you want to do, like for instance with the where the Starbucks is and the DeAndrea, I don't know what that property is called, but that whole area, if you what else do you want to put in there? And I don't think anybody wants a big box store there. But that's one of the options.
But there's a huge vacant parking lot right there now.
Is huge. It's waiting.
I know,
It's waiting.
right?
At one time, they talked about putting Stop and Shop over there on where Crest is. When Stop and Shop was moving around at Amity Plaza, they were trying to get them to come on to the Crest property. So you have to call out something there. You have to, and the idea is you want some controls that we dictate. So
The more mixed use that you have, actually the less driving you're going to have, because that's the form, that's the setup that people walk in. If it's all people almost always drive from a single family house or a two family house, even if they're just going down the block. It's rare that they almost always take their car. So if you're developing single use residential, you're going to have more traffic. If you're developing residential where you've got some mixed use, where people can go to walk for the things they need to, it's where the demand gets developed, and it's where people may still get in their cars to drive to work and back, but they're not going to be getting in their cars to do their Sunday errands or Saturday errands or whatever, because in theory the way this develops is that it's the stuff they really need is going to have a market and will be built right down where they are. Banks, pharmacies.
Are we talking about kind of the marginal driver who's the outlier? I mean, my office is down there. I can't fathom more congestion. If somebody lived down there, even in mixed use, I can't fathom them not driving even across the road to Stop and Shop. And I try to, so as I think Jeff was saying, most people come in and out of there from Litchfield and Amity from the north, drive through.
And that's through traffic. Those
Right.
are people who are going home or going to work, and they're just driving through.
But the person who may live here in a mixed use area, that traffic is so at the margin, no?
It's the traffic that is actually coming in and out of the curb cuts more often than any other traffic. And that's what's going to slow your traffic down. That's the traffic that, if you're going to the meat market, you're going to the hardware store, and you're going to the bank, that's the traffic that you're going in and out of with a car that becomes more obstructive than if you take a walk across the street, go to the meat market, get what you need, go home.
So you're making the case that introduction of mixed use allowances in these areas would abate traffic or make it not be any worse. Is that what you're saying? Like for the traffic that's presently there, if you do more mixed use instead of just residential or retail.
You have to design it for pedestrians and for primarily pedestrians because of the tightness of it, but also for bicyclists. It has to be designed that way. So it's not just about what you put in the regulations, although that's a big part of it, but it's also then when these applications come to you, making clear to applicants that they, if they're going to build something in this area, that they need to be building in favor of the pedestrian and bicyclists first, and the automobile
But
second.
now, as the zoning regulations are, someone could come in and put in just a bigger box store. Is that correct? So without applying these new regulations, somebody can come in and build something, right? Which would cause more traffic.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
What does the planner say?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. So that's why you're advocating the mixed use down there, right?
That's why we, the commission, are
Right, we,
making
right.
this
So a couple things, because,
Right?
someone-
I mean, we
I don't want to
talked about
speak
this
for
for a
people,
long
but
time.
yes, okay.
so, food for thought, for our next meeting. I don't know whether did everybody read the minutes from our special hearing meeting?
I read them.
Okay, so I guess the only other thing is if you read any comments in there that you think we haven't addressed, and we could talk about it the next meeting too, but I'm just,
Yeah.
I
There's a lot
read it,
there.
did not read it closely, and I think I figured it out, and
Yeah.
given our discussion.
I would
More
agree.
attention to those sorts of
yeah,
things.
I would too. Okay, and then.
Took about a week and a half to write them.
I know.
It was painful.
I'm sure. There's a lot there.
Thank you.
But it was-
Because I was trying,
It was important though.
It's basically a transcript,
Right.
but I was being very conscious of having the text correct in terms of context, the woulds, the woody, and
I recall Jeff specifically asked for a transcript at her last meeting.
yeah, it's about as close as you're gonna get.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for your efforts.
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you.
Given that I also have other boards that I work for.
But where are you, baby?
That's right. So, along with
You said
that, along with that, we should think about where we want the parameters of T4. I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be as large as we're showing it. Maybe it doesn't go all the way up Amity Road, although I think it would work up Amity Road in the hopes of compromise. And, I do think it should go, my own gut is that it should go down Lucy Street, but that's just my opinion, so everybody has to agree to that at some point. And then the question is what to do with the property between Lucy Street and Merritt Parkway, which has to be something. So, that's, you have to make a decision on that. I mean, you could leave, going up Amity Road a little easier than you can leave this large piece of property between Lucy Street and Merritt Parkway, so.
There's just huge potential for, things coming in, businesses coming in, places, structures being built there
Yeah.
and up here that we need to address. Otherwise, it could really change the quality or the character of the town, specifically that area.
And we're already at risk.
Up where?
So like,
Where the 55 and over has been approved,
yeah,
and this area right here.
right. All that ruptured old macadam behind the brewery and Crest and what was the name of the pizza place? That whole area.
Monty's.
You know how it's all open? It used to be fenced, and now it's not. And it's just open, and it's just inviting development. I think,
So,
but we want to make it the right development.
or we at least want to put enough controls on it so that we can dictate what we want there.
Sure.
So I think that's what we should do. I think we should, before we approve these, I think we should go back and just make sure we've kind of addressed everything, so we won't necessarily approve it. You don't mind, Christine? I know you
I've
don't.
submitted them as a
Yeah.
draft, so
So,
technically they don't ever have to get approved.
yeah, right. They won't? Oh.
The statutes are strange.
Yeah.
You have to get in this draft minutes.
Right.
There's no thing about
Fine.
you ever have to approve the minutes, and so. Just go gentle on me.
There's a typo on the third page, fourth paragraph, two steps in.
Oh, okay, that's the only thing you found.
The March 5th minutes.
Yeah.
I don't think
No,
there
it
are
was
March
a lot of
5th
work,
minutes.
thank you.
I think it's only all the minutes to the special meeting.
I didn't, because I spent so much time on this, I didn't get time to.
Right. So there were no March 5th.
So
There
there
are
were
no
no
March
March 5th
fifth.
minutes to it.
Okay.
I actually don't think I'll be at the next meeting, but I can get comments to you, right?
Yes, it is.
It's the first Monday of May, it's always
Okay.
a conflict.
Okay, cool. So we'll hold off on the minutes. We don't have any other correspondence we received. All right,
Motion to adjourn?
I'm thinking.
Oh, here, you're holding off on that.
I got a game today.
I know.
Oh, you're 2 minutes over. I motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I kind of thought I made the motion, but.
Oh, there you go.